Welcome to You're Not Alone, the business podcast by Bishop Collins. I'm Juston Jirwander, the Director of Bishop Collins. And today we've got a special guest to hit off one of our first podcasts, and that is Glenn Lill. Glenn Lill, thanks for coming, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Really appreciate you coming and spending your time.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Glenn Lill is Managing Director of Denstock Australia. Fantastic company, client of ours. Got to be a fantastic company if it's a client of ours. And Denstock has got some really interesting stories because of Glenn and his team. But this is about Glenn, and I'd really like to find out. I want you to share your stories of not just Denstock, but what happened before Denstock. So, mate, can you tell me, maybe just give us a little bit of an idea about Denstock first, what it does, and then how the journey started, because there's some really good lessons in there on, stuff you're going to bring up. Take it away, Glenn.
Well, Justin, our company Denstock, we're distributors of footwear and accessories. We've grown over the last 15 years that I've owned the business, and I worked for it well before that as well. We distribute footwear through big box retailers like Anaconda and Macpacs. We deal pretty much with every emergency services throughout Australia with their fire boots, their uniform boots, their shoes that they wear on a daily basis. And then we also do a lot of vertical as well. So we do a lot of private label, which goes into the big box. So it's a good type of business because there's plenty of spokes in the wheel.
Yep.
Instead of being reliant on one particular avenue.
Yep.
Our income stream is spread across many different areas. So whether it's from government through to uniform supply, through to safety from a procurement level, compliance for on job sites, to leisure, and then you've got your home brands. So it's a fairly diverse business, which is good because particularly in these environments, one area may be affected, which we all know retail is struggling at the moment, but then other areas are flowing along quite well. Yeah,
so that we could talk about that for ages because you've got so many different contracts with different groups, the emergency services, retail box chains, all of this. So let's go back now and telling me a little bit about what drove you to be. Who is Glenn, and why did Glenn end up being the managing director of such a successful company?
Yeah. Well, you'll probably always go straight back to school. I didn't love school. I think I learnt more out of school than in school, but I was just as the teacher would say, a plodder. So I left in year 10 and I did a carpentry apprenticeship, and I started work there, and I clearly remember the very first day of work where I stood by it was like a drill press. Yep. And I had 40,000 corner blocks to drill a hole in that went underneath the seats. And about 2 or 3 hours after that, I actually stood there and I thought, I've got 40 plus years of my life left here, and this is what I don't want to do. I worked my way through, had a lot of fun during the apprenticeship, but I, once again, probably didn't love it.
Yep.
I worked my way through that, and then, my father was a sales rep. And I thought, well, that's an area that I'd like to get into. I liked people, always have. And then I managed to get my first job as a sales rep, and then slowly worked my way up the years, and then ended up leaving there and going and working for Rebel Sport, which is still around, and became a department manager and an assistant manager. And then there was one day, and this is probably the start of the journey that really sort of brought me to those forks and left and right in the road, and which journey I took. And I was training for triathlons at the time, so it was pretty much I'd work and then just train. That was my life. And I rode to Bankstown from Penrith, and I arrived, and there was one of my old, the guy, state manager called Graham Dudley, and he said, where'd you come from around the corner? I said, no, I just rode from Penrith. And he said, what? And I told him my training regime, and he sort of saw something in me, and he said, listen, we might have a role for you. Would you be interested? And of course, everyone wanted to work for Nike in the late 90s, 2000s. Yeah. It was the brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I got offered a role there, and it was as a training rep, and I'd go around and train all the Foot Locker and Athlete's Foot stores. And I would, and I loved it. I really enjoyed my job. And then from that, it took me into sales. And I spent several years into sales. And as I was going along, I was obviously increasing my education and learning from mentors that were within the business. And there were a lot of them there because Nike was a very official place. It was suits and ties. You'd go to a trade show, you'd wear a suit and a tie. And so, there were a lot of guys there that, I learned a lot to do. But I also used the phrase that Nike taught me a lot of things not to do as well. Yeah. That in the end it became very impersonal. So, that wasn't what went with me because it's all about relationships there.
Yep.
So that was sort of fizzling out in the early 2000s, and Graham Dudley had left and he went to another company, and I rang him and said, listen, it's not really working out over here anymore. Is there anything over there? And he had this small brand that was called High Tech. And it was just a really small niche brand, 3 models and 1 black boot.
At the time, it was small.
At the time, it was small. It's a lot bigger today. So I went over there and started working as a brand manager. So once again, working my way up. And he was a big influence in my working career, and I recently caught up with him for a beer with the old boys from Nike, and we all agreed that this guy was the guy that gave us the start. And so I started working there as a brand manager, and that really gave me the freedom to sort of do what I love doing, and that was building footwear, building ranges. And so I went along and worked as a national brand manager and development manager for many years through to probably 2009. And then I had an opportunity where there was Denstock New Zealand, which was, we worked very closely with them. I was working for somebody else at the time, and they were a smallish New Zealand distributor of High Tech and Magnum as well. And the brand principals wanted to bring the brands together, and they approached me about joining them and coming over and being part of the Australian arm. And at that stage, I thought I knew everything about business. Yeah, sure, I can do this. And it's an opportunity of a lifetime. Yeah. But in order to get there, obviously, there were things along the way that they saw that, I worked hard, and they saw something in me that they wanted to give me the opportunity to, run my own race. Yep. So we managed to come to an agreement where the brands would shift over to Denstock New Zealand, but we'd start up in Denstock Australia arm. It was early days, and I remember it because I did have to come up with some financial backing because we had a lot of stock, and this was right in the heart of the GFC too. So it's 2009. Yep. Banks weren't lending. The contract was up. I wanted to start this business up, and I remember the guys at Denstock New Zealand, they were in with the banks on a Sunday negotiating, getting the line of credit, and I'm with my father-in-law at the time, and my dad, and so listen, I need to borrow some money. Yep. To get me started. And so we managed to get that, and the banks came on board. And then we started in late 2009, and it was one of those situations that it was all in. Yeah. And I could not fail. So it was at that point I was working 6 days a week, and I'd work 12 hours a day. And I had it in the back of my mind that most people would log off after 8 hours, but I'm doing 4 hours of extra work, and I'm working 1 extra day. So that means I'm getting ahead of my competition all the time. And I did that for 2 years, and we worked. And I still recall it now. I remember, I needed to go and get some photocopying done. So I'd go down to the local, because we had no money. We didn't have the cash flow, and we had a lot of stock, and the business was just me, and I was working in the back room of the house. And so as things started to get moving, and I was, because now I'm running the business, doing it my way, uncovering opportunity, getting contracts, building the revenue of the business. I had great business partners in the background, which were in New Zealand from a finance, and also a very similar person to myself, and also one of our older partners who left after a few years, I had the backing and the support of those guys to guide me through the questions. But pretty much I was a solo guy working in Australia with 5 reps and out on the road. And I think most of them were agents back then. I don't really even think we had an employee. And then we had a lady who did the books. So it was a real
tight ship
at the start.
Yeah.
Then we, as the business started to grow, I spent, I bought a house with a self-contained unit under it, still maintained that level of smallness in the way that the business... Efficiency. Yeah, it was. And it was a tight business. The banks would look at it and they said, how can you run this level of turnover with so little staff? And there was a lot of automation, and it was a lot of... they used to do the back office, so from a management point.
And a lot of hard work from you. Like you said, I'm getting this image of you then doing everything from the cleaning to the accounting to a degree, supported by a bookkeeper, really just cutting it fine as much as you can to get the job done.
Yeah, that was the case.
Staff on contracts for sale, etc. So you weren't committed to, too many high costs.
No, not really. And I think the best part about it is I had the support of the New Zealand Denstock arm. Yeah. Where they would manage the finances, they would manage the P&L. They wouldn't get involved in the day-to-day business. They allowed me to do what I did best, and that was out there building the business, growing the business, looking for opportunities. Yep. And they were coming in all the time, and we were slowly picking them up. And there was one real period that was evident, and we never used to do fire boots. And I remember I got a phone call from one of our big uniform suppliers, Stuart & Heaton at the time, and he said, Glenn, we need you to do fire boots. We've seen the fire boots that they do overseas, and if you don't do it, somebody else will. I remember exactly where I was, and I thought, well, I have to do this. And so I went and printed off the standards for fire boots, and it was like it was written in another language. I mean, this was all compliance and testing methods, and it was really tough. So what I chose to do was to ring people within standards and go for a coffee with them, get to understand it, get them to explain it to me. And we eventually, with Stuart & Heaton, and the backing of, we got everything, the samples done, we got them, they came to Australia, and I said to the guys there, well, what do we do next? And they said, well, you got to order it. I said, yeah, but I don't have any orders. And this is early in the piece too, and he said, well... This
is the scary part, right?
This is the scary part.
Making big orders without any forward sales.
And it's one of those things,
and you got to bet on yourself.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, Justin, that you look at and you say, well, okay, well, if this is what we need to do, we've got to do it. And I still remember making the call, and it was about $400,000 worth of stock, and that was a lot of stock back then.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot of stock now.
It's still a lot of stock now.
Back then it was worth a lot more. And I remember, one of our original business partners, he said, well, Glenn, don't worry about it. If it doesn't work, we'll sell it at Safety Boots. I can tell you now, knowing what I know, they wouldn't have sold us Safety Boots. So we ended up bringing it in, and it was just about to land, and we got a phone call, and it was from Stuart & Heaton, actually, and they said, Glenn, those fire boots you're bringing in. I said, yeah. He said, how far away are those? And I said, oh, they're about a week away. They're a week to land. I said, but I haven't sold any. And he said, well, listen, your major competitor's just gone out of business. They've gone broke. And I said, right. He said, how much do you have? And I said, well, we've got about 2,000 pairs. Okay. Rings me back and he says, they're all sold. So it was one of those points in that was...
There's one of the rare events where it goes your way.
Yeah, it does. But I think as a calculator, we were always going to have a business there.
Yeah.
But it was also about understanding and doing, the stop checks and balances along the way, getting it right.
Yep.
I've bought stuff that hasn't sold.
Yep.
And, it's been an expensive lesson. I think I spoke to you earlier and I said, it's like I've done a university degree, but I probably could have paid for it 10 times over because, there are errors along the way, but you learn. You don't learn
You learn from your mistakes. The PhD of life, as we talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. So as the business, so that was the catalyst that got us into the fire boot business, and then we're in all of the police boot business, the ambulance, the corrections, and as I said, a lot of the other businesses that we have. So as we've gone along the way, we have built that and up to a point that several years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, I had buy down options to keep buying more of the Australian side of the business.
Yeah.
And the Denstock New Zealand boys, they basically said, well, listen, why don't you buy the lot? And that was a big shifting point as well. Once again, timing. I still remember shaking hands with them on the 10th of March in 2019. And no, it's 2020. And we know what happened 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
COVID. So here I am, negotiated, signed a deal to buy a business. COVID hit, the whole world is shut down. I'm at a point thinking, I'm done. I'm going to completely bankrupt here because the dollar dropped 20% overnight.
So can I safely say in business you've had a couple of good times where you've seen an opportunity and you've sort of said, I'm going to grab it. Mm-hmm. You've worked your ass off. You've worked hard. You've cut it really fine with budgets, efficiency. And then every now and then you get a hit, but this is a big hit. How did you handle that big hit? How do you handle a big hit when you've got so much exposure?
I went into fright and flight mode.
Yep.
Probably a lot of people.
Yep.
And I remember my business partner, Don, rang me up and he said, mate, you need to put prices up now. Otherwise, we are broke. We won't, we're gone, we're done. And it was the case because pretty much our margins are not high enough that you can take a hit of the Australian dollar dropping against the US by 20%. It'll take you out overnight.
Yeah.
So that for the next month, it was probably one of the toughest months of my life. I remember getting up every morning and it had to be phone calls through the procurement officers justifying it, requesting an urgent increase in pricing, talking to retailers, talking to, we had a big box retailer that turned around and said, cancel all of the season. We're not taking it. And it's a serious amount of stock because retail stopped. So you're having to navigate, and no one knew this. No one knew the end game here. We were all, and there's no textbook that you can refer to because the world lived through a pandemic back when I think it was the Spanish flu.
Yeah,
that was the last one, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think we've moved on a little bit more from, where we were back then. So there was nothing to refer to understand how this was going to play out.
Yeah.
What it taught me during that time was the value of relationships.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get one procurement officer, I didn't get one uniform officer, I didn't get one of our customers that turned around and said, no, we're going to hold you to that. And these are locked in contracts a lot of the time too. Yeah. So we're going to a uniforms partner and they've got to go to a procurement person, or we're going to a government department and saying, these are the reasons why. And they all knew why, because everybody was in the same boat and everyone was doing the same thing. But they understood that the world needed to go on and they had to pass these through. So we got through that period there. But, when I looked at it, it was the relationships that we had that now enabled me to have those conversations. And they're hard conversations. And they're the conversations that I was always too scared to have about putting prices up. We've got a price increase. And slowly you erode your margin. And what it's taught me along the way is that you've got to look at your business and their prices need to go up. They need to go up. People can choose to say yes or no, but it depends on your relationship and the product that you have and how you deliver it as well. Yeah. I think from a company point of view, trust is king. Yeah. They need to trust you. You need to be a company that has
especially during times like this when everybody's 100%. Panicking.
We know these guys are credible. We know these guys. We need these guys in the future.
Yep.
And so we started still to work through that. And, so we shook hands on the 10th of March. We had COVID. I'd negotiated the prices and allowed the business to, maintain a profitability that was going to get us through that period. And it was in that period there where I think it weeded the bad suppliers and the good suppliers out.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it was like someone just, as we started to creep out. And if I think back at it, it was exactly this. It was a 3-month window. The first month, nothing happened. The second month, government came back on.
Yep.
Not to where it was, but it came back on. The third month, retail
came back on.
Retail in the compliance sector, so safety boots,
right,
came back on.
Yep.
And then the third month, retail came back on.
Yep.
And it didn't just come back on in a way of it just went to where it was. It actually went right up.
Yeah.
And then
they're all trying to catch up. And then you've got to be ready.
Well, we're quite an agile company.
Yep.
So we can pivot a lot quicker than probably some of the big ones. And whilst we didn't cancel all of our stock in China, we agreed that we'd probably put it into a warehouse over there. And it was gold because a lot of the other companies cancelled. So then we got a phone call from our big customers saying, "Hey guys, we need to reinstate those orders." Well, once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
You can't just ring up China and say, "Hey, listen, push the green button," and they start pushing out again.
Yeah.
So we're in a very fortunate position that we were able to deliver for that season. Plus, we were starting to get more business come through the door. And there's something I always work on in the background. It's not like I've always got 10 or 15 projects working away in the background, because if you don't, you might lose something and then something pushes through. So it keeps...
Well, this comes into the relationship and trust thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because when the times were tough, you built up relationships.
Yeah.
You still had the courage to go and buy that stock or keep it in China rather than say to China, just get rid of it.
Absolutely.
Which meant that when everybody was ready to go again, you'd already had the courage, you've got stock, you gave it to them, they then go, well, we can trust this guy because when we're ready to go fast, he can do it because you're nimble.
That's right. And that's a really important thing that you tend to probably see with, I don't, Justin, you deal with companies out there, and there's probably a lot that are a little bit like ocean liners, and it takes a lot to turn them around.
That's right, and it does. And being nimble is something that all big firms love to do, but it's really hard.
Yeah,
and I would say it does come down to relationships, because the relationships within the firm stop it from being able to be nimble.
And it's ironic along the way that we're talking about relationships, because only in the last few years, and I think I spoke to you earlier as well, like I didn't go to university. I didn't, I learned out in the world about, making deals, doing deals and losing deals, and talking to people and learning off people is probably where, I've really found, how I've got the most out of my business career. And you learn a lot, because there are a lot of smart people out there that can pass on their wisdom to you, and it's real world wisdom. And if you pick out of it what you believe is for you. Yeah. And I was doing some coaching.
You don't have the ego to go, I know everything.
No, I don't. Yeah. But I don't. I thought I did. I look back now when I first came in 2019.
No, but even then you didn't have the ego where you just thought, I'm just going to do it myself. You reached out and learned and got experience.
Yeah. And I enjoy learning.
Yeah.
And I started doing some leadership coaching, because I'd worked in a silo all my life. And then all of a sudden I had to start managing staff, particularly when...
So that's good. Look, I want to finish it there on your journey up to there, because that's really where you're talking about a solo journey, right? Yeah. It was a solo journey. It was you battling to get to a point where you're actually quite successful, but then you're going to the next stage, right? Mm-hmm. So you certainly destroyed the phrase of an overnight success, right? It takes 30 years for an overnight success, as they say. And so you've kind of destroyed that, and I'm glad you have, because people just think, people make it get to the top, and they make it because they're just lucky. And there's certainly no luck there. There's a lot of hard work. But then you came from being a loner to being a leader. Yeah. How did that change? And what was it that made you, because you were successful as a loner. There's no doubt about that from your stories you've just said. But what's now made you successful as a leader?
Being successful as a leader, it was a really challenging time. So it agreed on the business, but I knew I needed to bring somebody in because
Yep.
I could not.
You learnt you can't do it all on your own.
I couldn't do it all on my own.
Yep.
So I approached a mate of mine who is really high up in Telstra, and he's a great operations manager and smart guy.
Yep.
And I approached him and sold him on the idea of what we had.
Yep.
The business was doing well back then, but it probably wasn't doing as well as it is now.
Yeah.
So he agreed, and he'd been 25 years there. So, you know, he was on a really good wicket, and, you know, he enjoyed it there, but he wanted a new challenge. Yeah. So he agreed to come over, and we agreed on shares and buy-in and everything. We bought the New Zealand guys out. Now, they used to do all of our management, back-end office, so the customer service team, the finance, everything was done in New Zealand. Well, the first thing we needed to do was bring it back to Australia.
Yeah, control it. Yeah.
He worked in the office underneath my family home where I'd been working for. So we'd gone from this big, huge office over near Mascot to something that would be lucky to be 50 square metres and, you know, 3 desks in there and people talking. I think it drove him mad. The dogs were coming in but that was what it was. And it was in April. I think we agreed in December, and in April we said, listen, we need to buy an office and bring all of that, in all of the back office back to Australia. Yeah. So we bought an office up at Balgowlah. We got some staff in, and no one knew anything. We had one guy that, you know, was still over in New Zealand that we employed anyway. He was my operations guy, and he's a gun. Yeah. And so we...
You haven't let him go. He's still here.
He's still here. Yep. Yeah, he's still here. I was on the phone on the way.
I don't think you've let anybody go. Except the bookkeeper. You got us.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Which was the best decision, I think, that you said you'd ever made.
Yeah,
but, we're moving on. We're not talking about us.
We can talk about that later. Yeah. So we... then all of a sudden, staff came into it, and I'd not had to manage staff before. I had to manage my sales guys, but that was more about, hey guys, here's a product, go out and sell it.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's a bit more than that. I think you're belittling that. There's a lot of leadership skills in that.
Yeah, there may have been, but I think
you just found it easier.
I found it easier to work with it that way. Yeah. And then, so I started doing these leadership courses because I needed to, in order to, because I'd get frustrated because now I've got staff there and I couldn't understand why it wasn't done, and maybe I phrase it incorrectly. So one of the biggest thing that I learned as being a leader and also an owner of a business is my purpose. Yeah. And what is my purpose? And when, I got asked that question, I said, my purpose is to, you can say it's to make money, or it's to, it's not a purpose.
That's not a purpose
at all. And then eventually it got out of my purpose was to educate the world on relationships and relationship building. And unbeknown to me, I'd done that my entire life. Yeah. Because that's my purpose. That's what I enjoy doing. Yeah. I love going and meeting people, whether it's someone I don't know, at a party, listening to their story, someone that I do know. It's what juices me every day. And whether it's and along that journey, I've been living it, but I didn't know my purpose. Yep. But now I know it. Then I also started to think, okay, educate the world on relationship building. So now I need to educate my staff on the importance of relationships. Yeah. Make sure that, you build those relationships, you harvest them, because they're the most important things when you need them that you can rely on. And then there are other things in order to empower them, because I was so much of, I'd probably say a bit of a control freak, where I would actually say, no, I can do it. I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And in the end, I knew I couldn't do it, and I was dropping the ball. Yeah. So then I realised...
You're having to trust other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then throwing them and recognising who they were as well. So there's no point in, throwing the ball to somebody that's not a good finisher and saying, listen, I've got the point to here, can you finish this off for me? Yeah. Or throwing the ball to somebody that's not a good salesperson and say, listen, can you go and sell this? So I started to learn about identifying the team members that I had and then their strengths. Yep. And that was hard because, that was the hardest thing for me, to try and give stuff away but then knowingly say to them, listen, you're going to make mistakes. And I still say that to them now. I'd rather you make a decision then not a decision at all.
Yeah.
Because if you're sitting there procrastinating on it, we're going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I'm someone that just walks in and says, yes, no, let's
That's
do
great.
it.
That's
I don't like to sit
That's
around.
such good advice for people starting up, making a decision. Because if you procrastinate, sit there, then nothing's going to happen.
Yeah. And also empowering your team.
Yeah.
Because if they're comfortable, and in my early days when I was a solo, the guys that worked for me were too scared to make a decision because they were too scared to make the wrong decision just in case I didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
And then they told me that, and I said, well, you shouldn't be like that. And they said, well, mate, if you tell us, you said, well, why'd you do that? So then I had to step back and say, well, if these guys make the wrong decision, that's okay.
Yeah.
But let's sit down and look at and work through it, why we made the decision and then what we could have done better next time. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to improve their growth. You're not going to have them grow with you. And if we're growing as a company, I need the whole team and everyone in the company coming along for the journey. There's no point in me growing or a few people because we're only as good as the slowest person that's going to come along with the company.
Yeah. Right,
that really was something that I learned. But I felt more
empowered. There's a lot of Harvard wisdom in there that you've just learnt off the lessons of life, right? I call you a street fighter. Because you learn everything in life off the street that you don't have to look at a book, although you can if you need to, but it's the lessons through other people, interactions, experiences, failures, tripping up.
Yeah. And there's even, it's interesting, just little listening. Yeah. Fortunately, we've got podcasts out there now. So there's business podcasts.
Exactly.
And there's clips that are on social media in regards to successful people, and they just give
what they do that makes them successful. And you hear so many people saying it's got to work. So try it.
Yeah.
Can I bring you back to something that you said during your journey that I know a lot of our clients do have a question around about, especially growth companies.
Yep.
Startups also have this, and it's about finance. Like at the beginning, you were able to get some help from Denstock New Zealand, your parents, there was some sort of, you had to really pull everything together, squirrel everything together, get all your nuts together, and this is the best I've got, and you were supported, right? That's the beginning phase. Everybody has to just do that, cut costs, etc. But then in your growth phase, you then had to find more funds.
Yeah.
Now, how did you do that when you had, what were the challenges, and how did you successfully do that?
That's an interesting question.
Because it's still an ongoing challenge, right? The bigger you grow and you keep growing, and we've just gone through this process with you, and you've done it again.
Yeah.
Each step has been harder, and it's been bigger dollars, but still the same problem. So how do you get through it?
It's a good question about cash flow, because cash flow kills businesses.
Yep.
And we're a cash flow business where we're selling things all day, every day.
Yep.
And we still, find there are periods of time where our cash flow is tight. Chinese New Year, when you're a business of our size and you have to ramp your stock levels up by millions.
And you get sick of me every month telling you the same thing about your stock turns. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that growth's painful. Sometimes you can be growing and you don't know it.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you get to this pain point and you say, why are we having these problems? Well, you just haven't recognised it.
Yep.
And I think with businesses, and then there's a lot of support out there now, whether it's a trade finance facilities, there are, particularly if you've got a great relationship with your bank manager.
Yep.
And, I can only encourage anybody in business, whilst a lot of people don't really want to talk to the banks, every quarter I would send my P&L through to my bank manager, every quarter. So he could understand my business, and I got some great wisdom once said to me, said that you may not need the bank, but one day you will. And the day you need that bank, you have already laid the platform for them to say, I know your business.
So this is relationships again.
Absolutely.
Which is your purpose, right?
100%.
So relationships with your bank. People used to say, people now say, well, you don't have relationships with banks because the bank manager's gone now, right?
Yeah.
But that's not true, because there are bank managers there that can deal with that. So you've obviously found that.
Yeah, and we've got a great bank manager.
Yeah.
And so from a cash flow project.
Finding the person in the bank that is the right person and building a relationship.
Yeah,
again.
and it can change so quickly. I mean, we're in a position now where, we look at it and projections forward, sales are good. the dollar has dropped. So it means you've got less cash flow in your business. So what you thought you had, you might not have.
Yeah.
You need to sort of keep looking at it all the time. The other thing about cash and growth in the business is don't hold on to old stock. You know, we had
good point.
a lot of old stock in our business, and we got an offer, and it was 10 cents in the dollar. And
I remember you calling me about that.
Yeah, just say, how do we do this?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a hit.
Yeah.
It'll be blood in the water.
Yeah.
It's not nice seeing it on your P&L, but it's out of your building. And you've turned it into cash that then you can reinvest in product that's actually going to generate you an income.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I go into my warehouse and I see these dusty boxes that have been sitting there for 2, 3, 4 years.
That's brilliant. That's good advice.
It's you know, and that's the problem. So you think, oh yeah, I can still get money for it. And the other part about that is sometimes the first offer is the best offer, you know, and I've experienced that.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before, but I love it. Sometimes the first offer is the best offer. That's cool.
You can knock it back and then you can go around and find out that first offer is generally the best offer. And by the time you go back to take it, it could be gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, cash flow kills businesses. It's a matter of, I think, you know, working with a great, whether it's an accountant or a CFO in the business, to making sure that you're looking at your P&L every month.
Yep.
Because and asking questions why things are up and down, and looking to save things. Like, it's very hard in business these days to make a big savings.
Yep.
But if you look at your controllable expenses and then how you can adjust that, you know, whether it's your freight, or your big ticket items, your warehousing, how can we save money there? Yeah,
your big items are the ones we always talk about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And do those projects, but, you know, looking at fuel and things like that, you're probably not going to sort of get where you need to be. But cash flow, borrowing cash, you know, I remember at the start, and that goes back to the very first days, is it was non-negotiable. I could not fail.
Yeah.
Because if I failed, I was bankrupt.
Yeah.
I had 4 kids, a dog, a wife. We were renting at the time when it first started. We bought later on. And failure just was not an option. And I had to do what I had to do to get it through. The great thing about working at home is I actually got to see my kids grow up as well. So whilst I was working huge hours, I could always come up from downstairs at 3:30 in the afternoon, see all the kids, have a cup of coffee, talk to them, and then go back down and work till, you know, dinner.
Nice.
Okay.
So even amongst all that, which is probably more of a sort of a balance issue of lifestyle, even after all these demands, you're working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, you're slogging it out, you still try to find time for your family, which is very important because it comes back to your relationship side.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this actually, thank you for the finance aspect. So you've told me some fantastic things here about the finance and growth, right? Mm-hmm. So firstly, have a good relationship with your bank manager.
Yep.
And this is all coming to what you're saying, relationship with your bank manager, relationship with your internal people, your accountant, your CFO, people who are helping you with your management and your operations to help keep costs down and then be more efficient. So you keep lean with your cash flow.
Yep.
Recognize that you've got a whole lot of money sitting in stock. Don't hold on to it just because you're afraid you've made a bad decision. No, maybe not even a bad decision, just luck and you couldn't sell it. Get rid of it.
Absolutely.
Get as much as you can.
Yep.
First offer is often the best. Not always, but I love that. All those things have helped you manage, because it's not one thing, right? No. The bank's just isn't giving me money. It's like that's not the only thing.
Yeah.
It's all of those things. So they all do come down to relationships and management. So that's great.
And the banks are here to help you. They're not against you. Everyone says, the banks are, and listen, they're there to make profits for their shareholders.
Yep.
They're to do a job.
Yeah.
But if you can have a great relationship and you keep them informed of your business, and some people might say, I'm not going to tell them anything. No. That's the opposite. We tell them everything.
I like that.
Every single month, P&Ls come through, even to the point when some great P&Ls come through, and then I'll ring him and say, hey, check the P&L out.
Make sure he looks at it. Yeah,
and
that's good.
But then when you do need to scale up and you need that additional trade finance or you need a bit of assistance to grow your business, the paper's really easy that they write. They say, well, here's their P&Ls. I understand the business. They're always talking to me. These are the reasons why they want to grow. This is the opportunity and this is what they need. And it's a really clean transaction. And it's an enjoyable process.
Yeah.
I remember, Justin, when we spoke to you, we used to have a bookkeeper that did our and we're fortunate enough that you reached out to us. And I still remember exactly where I was. I was in the Qantas lounge and we're flying overseas. And I was having a conversation.
I didn't know it was that memorable, but I'm really touched.
I remember exactly where I was. And it was the conversation. And I got off the phone and I thought, you know what? We need to move from a bookkeeper to an accountant. And this is going to solve our problems, because at the end of the day, what business am I in? I'm not in accountancy. I'm not in finance. I'm not in... If I can get professional people to handle that for me, and it's the same even with our warehousing.
Yeah.
Do we buy a warehouse, fill it full of staff, manage the staff, have the headache of the staff, or do we go to a specialist and use a 3PL?
Yeah.
And we're a big company, and we say, well, you know what? We're going to give it to someone that's professional because we want to focus on what we're good at.
Yeah.
And that's product and sales.
Yeah.
And we'll live in that lane and we'll outsource all the other people.
That's really good what you said. Focus at what you're good at. I mean, we hear that a lot, but that's really good to see it in that light.
I'm not a warehouse guy. I'm not a finance guy. I'm not an accountant. I don't want an accountant sitting in my office.
And sometimes people try to do too much, right? We see that. We see they try to do too much in their costs and then they go bust because they just can't split themselves up in that much.
It allows you to be agile. And that goes back to pivoting quickly. You know, if you don't have a big overhead, you know, when you've got a 3PL, sure, you can make some savings by having your own warehouse. But if you don't, it means that if you go down in sales, you're actually not paying more. You're still paying the same amount, but you're just paying for the movements that you actually process.
Yeah.
With an accountant, he might only have 3.5 days a week. What are you going to get him to do? Ring up his customer service?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Outsourcing these specialist areas that people are skilled at, we've found as a business very important, because it allowed us, once again, just to focus on, you know, you walk in our office and it's a nice, reasonable size office, but it's doesn't have a lot of people there.
No.
And it's even to the point now that we're online ordering platforms.
You got a lot of people working in all different areas,
EDI
and out on the road, and
you know. So we've sort of said to one of our customer service ladies who's really bubbly, hey, why don't you go out and see Anaconda and Macpacs and you know, do that one day a week. So she's loving that.
Yeah, great.
And so it's all about trying to streamline it, automate it as much as possible as well, if you can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so there's something I want to draw your attention to, or I'd like to talk about, because I think it's very valuable. And you've talked about relationships with everybody, with people that you do business with your employees, but you've also talked about your relationships with your kids and your wife. And then, you know, all these challenges, people grow, but you were challenged by something which I find is going to be very valuable, and that was the breakup between you and your wife.
Yep.
Now, that's a challenge for many reasons. One, there's emotional for you and your children, so you've got to deal with that. But there's also the relationship with you and your business partner, and how he's going to be affected by feeling a bit of anxiety about what's going to happen here with the assets and the split. Mate, you're one of very few people, probably in the 0.5, 1%. I'm not a data analyst, but I argue this point, or I try to very gently say this point to everybody. Try to do it amicably. Don't avoid solicitors' fights. Avoid legal battles. But not many people can do that. But you did, and it's been really quite an inspiring journey for me to watch, that you very rarely see, that you've managed to do that. Now, tell me, what were the things that helped you do that?
Well, I think it comes down to, well, as you know, I was with my partner for 23 years. We got 4 great kids together.
Yep.
And over that, probably focusing on the business and probably not too much, you know, it was a bit like ships in the night, 4 kids, trying to get them through school, me working and growing on the business, and eventually it just ran out of path. And as you know, we sat down and we looked at it and said, okay, well, we can either go down the road of, guns at 10 paces and, it'll be long drawn out, but sat down and understood what each other wanted. And to be honest, we've been along the journey together from nothing.
Yeah.
So it was only fair that we walk away with an equal amount or thereabouts.
Yep.
And so we were able to, one of the things that, I pride myself on is that integrity and what my word is, I'll do my word.
Yep.
And I'll complete something. There were certain things within that I said, I'll make sure that this is done. And there were some negotiations along the way. I wouldn't say it was completely smooth. Yeah, there were some rocks under the pillow some nights. Yep. But at the end of the day, and, we were fortunate enough that we both knew you and from an outsider's point of view, gave a very open and transactional indication into the business and what. So we worked through that together, and honourably we both landed in agreement. And I think it took 13 months from the date, which is pretty quick.
That's amazing.
There were lawyers involved, but it was more just facilitating the process and
ensuring
going back
all the
and
right
forth.
ticks and
And it's a hard, I think, you've got to have two people of similar mind.
It does show her strength as well, right?
It does.
And that's great. I mean, she's the mother of your children, and you're the father of her children.
And you're also seen as, my kids are 20 and 18 and 15, nearly 16. And you are viewed through the eyes of your children. And good. I didn't want to be seen as somebody that, walked away and they see dad, living an amazing life, but yet them and their mothers were struggling to put food on the table. Not that I'd ever do that, but it was one of those things that, we worked through this process together. We looked at it, and naturally, she can't run the business, so I decided to take that road and a few other things and looked after her from a housing point of view. And
Well, mate, hat off to you, but it comes back to relationships, right?
Yeah, and it was a hard one because you're right with Lee. It was that, there was certain...
Sorry, so Lee is your business partner.
Yeah. There were certain areas of, I got given some great advice many, many years ago, and they said, to grow a successful business is to reinvest your profits back into the business.
Yeah.
So don't pull them out at the end of every year. Don't go and buy big fancy boats. Don't go and buy big fancy motor cars.
Yeah.
And, and reinvest. And we did that. And for a lot of our time, the banks couldn't work it out how we got so big, but we were just reinvesting our money. But then we got to a point where we had to go to the banks.
Yeah.
And this came back to my conversation with Lee at that point. As I said, mate, here's the time that I need to get some money out of the business.
Yeah.
and that was to go through this process. And it was a challenging time because he's been new to the business. I mean, he's only been in there for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I'm at a point saying, well, this is what I need to do. Because, at my age, I'm not old, but I'm not young, but I still wanted to be able to come out with a lifestyle and a sense of, what I wanted to still do things in life and be comfortable.
Yeah.
And it was communication through one of the things that's really important.
Open,
with any
you've always been open and transparent with
and honest communication. Trying to be on the same page as much as possible. I would encourage any person in business, if they've got a business partner or somebody that is involved as a partnership, have a shareholders agreement.
Yep.
So know exactly what each person wants out of it. Because if you've got someone in the business that wants to take money out and you want to reinvest it, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Or if you've got somebody that says, well, I only want to do this for 5 years and sell it, and the other person says, well, I want to work for 15 years and build this thing up, you've got a problem. So you've got to be aligned with your business partner and not 100%, but at least you need to understand what they
and trust each other.
Trust each other is important, and be very honest and open. And it was navigating uncharted waters for me. And we came to you. Actually, it was, I remember at the time, and I know you'd had a little bit of experience in this, and being able to find that person, whether it's your accountant, whether it's somebody that has been through it, that both parties respect, and even from a business sense that can provide business advice, company advice as far as whether the company's in a position to do that, and then also from personal advice to both parties, and it worked out okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's a fantastic result. So congratulations on all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks, Glenn. That in terms of your relationships with and how you've managed them, your open transparency, building trust, combining or aligning, not purposes, aligning values and goals, having a strong purpose. They're all these things that you've brought up. What about looking ahead? Let's look ahead and say, what is it that you succession planning? Where do you want to take the business? How do you think of the future? And who is it that what is your succession plan? What do you plan on doing, and how do you? It's a bit of a hard question, but how do you?
It is a hard one. It's an interesting question about succession planning and legacy, and particularly when my kids are at an age now, and they're sort of they're doing apprenticeships, and it's quite interesting because I didn't want them to do that. I wanted them to go out and be me. Run a business, don't work for anyone, and only because of my journey, I just felt it was a funny, because one of them's going to be a plumber and the other one's going to be a builder, which I love now, and I'm really enjoying it. And I've had the conversations with them because they're sort of a little lukewarm on it. And they said, "Oh, Dad, I want to be a plumber all my life." And now I reflect back and said, well, you don't have to be. You can be anything you want to be, but this is the start of your journey, and where you're going to end could be like me or it could be somewhere else. Yep. So when it comes to, they said, "Oh, well, can I come and work for you?" And I said, maybe one day. But what I want them to do is to go out there and work for a shitty boss, or a boss that's, that they realise who they don't want to work for. Work for a great boss. Understand what their passion is in life, and find their purpose. And then at some point after a period of time, if they want to work in the family business and there's a bit of an opportunity out there may be an element of succession. But a lot of the people I speak to, their kids don't really want to get involved in dad's business. They want to go and make their own way. Yeah. So then that comes down to, well, what's that look like now? So for us, it's about building employees in your business that are really, really good and passionate and love the business, and then look at them as being part of the succession. And there's mechanisms. There's a lot of mechanisms to fund them into the business that they don't have to go out there, because as businesses grow, they become more expensive. Yeah. But getting them into the business in some form of way is very important. Yep. Because it means that you're shoring up the future of it. Now, I can see myself working for another 10 years, maybe more, and but I probably won't be working 5 days a week in 10 years' time. It might be 4 days. But then I've got younger, enthusiastic management, high-level management coming through that have got a piece of a bit of life experience, and they've you also can guide them a little bit in the business. That that juices them to want more, and that can be, to look within your people, and if there's opportunity that they might want to be part of the business. It's a difficult one, because there's some people in the business that you think, I could never go into business with these people, but there are people that we've identified in our business that definitely would love to be a part of our business. And that's a discussion that, you sit down and have with them and say, what are your plans? How does this look if we were to offer you this opportunity? And see, I think this is great, because you're thinking now
and observing now about what are the possibilities for later on. And every great leader's like that, right? They see ability and they just recognize it and they sit there and they go, let's encourage it. Like the lady that you said is a bit bubbly and talks, and you said, see if you want to one day go and just spend one day going out.
Absolutely.
Doing some selling. So you're thinking now about the future 5, 10 years ahead.
Yeah, I don't think
Possibly.
I don't think you can think about the future as saying, okay, I'm going to build the business up in 10 years and sell it.
Yeah.
Because there's so many businesses out there who've got to that 10 years and they've got a business that's it doesn't even, it's too complicated, it's too niche, it's you know, it's and probably COVID was a great opportunity. It was feast or famine.
Yeah.
Where you had food retailers that have been around for 15 and 20 years that have built up these amazing businesses, and they went broke and they're gone and they never came back. But they thought that was their, you know, building it up to one day to sell it to somebody, and they have nothing to sell. People that have been working where all of a sudden there's going to be a demolition clause on the building.
Yeah.
So you can't just have that one tiered approach to say, well, we're going to do this and then go and sell it. You know, our business is not an easy business. It's not buying one product and selling it.
Yeah.
It's in multiple different areas, whether it's government, whether it's uniform, whether it's industrial, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's in private label.
Yeah.
So who's going to buy it? It's got to be a very specific. It's not like it's going to be. There's a lot of people
and
out
in
there.
that you got style and sizes and
absolutely. You know, you get
functionality.
someone that's a uniform provider that says, yeah, we'll buy that, but then they look at the other parts of the business and say, how do we work this? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, right.
So I think for us, it's more about looking at the journey. Is there anyone within that can do that? And then that's fine, because you might not find that one or two people within your organisation that are capable of buying the whole lot, but at least they've got then at least that makes it more attractive for somebody to buy later on, because they can say, well, you've got some shareholders in the business who want to stay there.
Yeah.
We will buy 80% of the business, but have these other shareholders which know the business intimately. So
and adding value.
It's adding value, and it's a clean fit.
Yeah.
Because we understand it.
Yeah. Well, mate, I'd certainly be interested in buying it in 10 years.
Yeah. I'll put that down. Thanks.
Put that down on your list of plans.
Absolutely.
Okay. We got one. So I'd like to wrap this up. You've given us some amazing insights. Really appreciate it. I'd like you to think back and just see if there's one piece of advice you could give, whether it be personal or professional, in how to navigate a really difficult decision.
How to navigate a difficult decision. I think my advice there would be to try and seek out somebody that's been there before, or even a mentor or somebody that you trust. A lot of people will give you advice. Yeah. And it's really important you go with the gut and make that decision. And it's in, you know, I don't make big decisions without consulting my business partner. Hey, this is what I think. This is what you think. I'm not always right. And then we make that decision, and I go ahead and do it. Yeah. And tend not to sit on it too long. You know, I don't like to do that, because I think it clouds you, and then a lot of other white noise gets in the road. Yeah. So, you know, my advice is just to write it down, look at the pros and cons of it. If there's somebody around within the industry that may have been through that you know, you can always reach out. I find ringing people up, and this goes back once again to relationships, ringing people up that you know are in the same industry and asking them, hey, have you ever experienced this, or what have you done here? There are people out there that will be able to say, hey, I've seen this before. Yeah. It's interesting with our brands that we have, two of the biggest footwear brands, I reckon they're the greatest guys in the world. I ring them up and just chat. Yeah. And we're in competition with each other. But
right,
we tend to sort of get along, and I will sometimes bring them up and say, hey, what's your spin on this? What do you think about this? And they're pretty good.
So
you know,
no ego and the courage to even speak, even get advice out of your competitors.
Not everyone wants to talk
great.
about successes and you know, certain things. Listen, they're not going to give you a balance sheet at the end of the day. You know, as long as you're not doing anything untoward towards them, and you know, you keep great relationships out there. People will always share gold nuggets with you to help you get through that, or help you make that decision. But definitely make a decision and make it in a reasonable time frame. Don't sit there and let that thing drag on, because, you know, if it's a big enough decision, it could drag the whole business down.
Yeah. So Glenn, you've shared your journey about being alone at the beginning, how hard you did it. Then you found a team, you became a leader. But still, as a leader, sometimes you feel alone. You know, this podcast is about, you know, you're not alone in business. It can be tough when you feel you're on your own. What does that phrase mean to you, you're not alone in business?
I think you're not alone in business is that, you know, if any business needs support from a good team, it needs good people behind you. And for anybody out there that thinks that they can just take it on themselves, well, you know, your odds are stacked against you. So my advice is to reach out to professional people, talk to people, friends, family, experts in certain fields, mentors, whatever it might be, because even those discussions that with the most random person you take away, you think, my goodness, you know, I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah.
You know, I talk to my partner about a lot of things, and she gives me a real different perspective on certain things, and I walk away and I thought, I'm completely 180 to what I was thinking about going into something, and I have a different mindset. So talk to people, don't bottle it up, and share your successes and share your failures. Don't be ashamed of those. You know, because it's what makes you grow and it makes you a better person.
Mate, thank you very much for joining us, Glenn. Really appreciate sharing all this journey, your wins, your losses, the challenges, and I hope people can gain some insight into it. Thank you.
Appreciate
very much.
You having us here today. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.